Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wichman. Up first is our weekly look at the activity taking place in the grain markets. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien has an overview of the soybean market and lists a few concerns about the hot, dry weather. Following the heavy rains and hail in parts of western Kansas, K-State crop production and cropping system specialist Ignacio Ciampitti has been getting a lot of questions about whether the corn, still in its early growing stages, will be damaged. He says a number of factors will come into play. We'll also have today's agricultural news, and K-State climatologist Mary Knapp looks at this week's agricultural weather, which is feeling more like summer than spring. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
This is Agriculture Today. As usual, we begin Friday's program with an update on the activity taking place in the grain markets with K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, first off, maybe just starting with the weather outlook, and what we've been seeing for the most part is hot, dry.
Well, that's right. And with what we've had in parts of Northwest and other areas of Kansas, yes, we've had some rainfall in the last several days, but in the broader picture, you still see quite a bit of concern to the east of here, heading on into the northern Missouri, southern Iowa, major portion of Indiana, and as well as on into a good part of Illinois. Again, prime corn and soybean production areas, you see an awful lot of concern about dry temperatures and forecast, frankly, on into next week for us to return to some pretty hot and dry temperatures. Some projections of temps up to the triple digits, etc. So as we sit right now, seeing December corn closed yesterday at 4.13 3/4 on again D's futures. November at 10.34 and a fourth. Even July wheat for hard red winter wheat at 5.42. You just wonder by the time the temperatures hit. And if they come with a vehemence that the forecasters are saying, you wonder what that'll do to the markets and probably lend some price support. It may not, for anybody that's has a crop in the ground or is trying to plant it, to see temperatures like that, it isn't very helpful, but at least on the price side, it may give us some support in the short run.
And soil moisture is also a concern.
Well, that's right. The projections of soil moisture on out from May 31st, yesterday, basically on through June the 7th, is for these areas to become just really dry, and that's just a subpart of just how dry it is in other parts of the country. Heading up into the Dakotas again, it seems like we talked about this last year, also, Jeff, in that North Dakota, parts of Minnesota were extremely dry. Well, they ended up and had great crops with just a few key rains. Well, here again, we've got almost the same map showing, gosh, it's pretty dry up in there. And I guess we'll see how it all works out. But at least at this point in time, we're needing rain to come into these areas, and until it comes in adequate amounts, well, there's support for the market and for prices going forward.
In terms of the soybean market, there's really a lot of information to cover with the soybean outlook.
Yes, I think that we've got a situation in the soybean markets where we've gotten to the place where we're sitting now, again, with soybean prices at or above $10. Again, you look at yesterday's closes. July was 10.18, November 10.34, a little bit of carry going through those. And, again, not the worst soybean prices we've ever seen. It's not $8 or $6 or $7 beans, but it's right at 10 or just slightly above. And we've gotten to the place where we've had a pretty tight crop, well, really a drought-damaged short crop in Argentina, pretty strong production, large production up in Brazil. And now anybody watching just the general news, much less the ag news, has been reading about dock strikes and all manner of issues that are starting to raise real concerns about the logistical capability of moving any goods in that country, much less grains to port. So a combination of dry conditions next week in key growing areas in the U.S. for corn and for soybeans, and the possibility of tangible disruptions to the ability of the ag industry in Brazil to actually move grain out of the interior to the ports, along with the seeming coming to the point of real decision, either go forth or not on U.S.-China trade issues. Will there be some joint cooperative resolution to some of those issues or not? We had signals a week or so ago that there would be, and now it seems that if anything, they must really be getting down to the end of negotiations, because the statements coming out now seem to be pretty strident on both sides. What's my point? The point is that there are a lot of things coming together, both production-wise in North America and South America, and on the demand side, that could roil up any of these markets, and it seems probably the one most vulnerable would be the soybean market. And when I say vulnerable to negative news, that's if, and the negative side of that would be is if the U.S. and China don't come to a cooperative, tangible, mutual understanding on how to move forward in grain exports, much less other exports. So that would be the negative outcome. The positive outcome, price-wise, would be a major disruption in the ability of beans to move out of the interior to the ports there in South America, much less any worries that higher temperatures and challenging crop conditions that could bring soybean production concerns in the market here in the U.S. So it just seems like we're on the cusp, I guess, of some potentially really volatile times in the bean market. And when will these times come, Jeff? Right when everybody's on their tractors trying to either get the final acres of beans planted or to spray what's out there. So, as usual, we'll be forced to make some really important decisions on pricing right in the middle of the time when we're doing just about everything else that we have to do to get the crop in the ground and up and going.
Well, that's a good point. And how do you make those decisions? What are going to be some of the factors that come into play?
I think those decisions will no doubt have to do with some very practical issues and some hoped-for goals. Practical issues are, i.e., are we going to be forced to move grain out of on-farm storage on that, again, I say on-farm storage sitting in our own bins? Are we forced to move either corn and or grain sorghum or soybeans or even wheat out of on-farm storage into channels to make room for coming crops? And that'll be a big issue. And here in Kansas, of course, we have a wheat harvest just around the corner. So that could all that much more, again, force people to act in terms of moving grain, making sales, et cetera, just to make room. On the other side, the hoped-for goals would be, again, something profitable. And I think, especially on wheat, the next crop that we're going to harvest, we're sitting at futures in July 542 on yesterday's close, December 584, that we were frankly just kind of hoping we might see as we were looking at marketing opportunities last November, December. So here we have seen some benefit to all of that, and we've seen, in fairness, some narrowing up of the basis for these crops. So we've got some decent cash prices. Great Bend, what is becoming a major elevator location here in the state of Kansas, 25 under bid under the July 517.5 for ordinary hard red winter wheat sales. Other places, again, Topeka 527, Hutchinson, high-end bids 522.5. Even out in western Kansas, you see some pretty decent bids. Maybe just a hair lower than some of those others, but still some decent bids as well. Point being that we've got some prices to consider. What's so challenging in Kansas, as any farmer will tell you, is, again, with the production risk we have, the threat of hail and whatever, do you go forward pricing at these levels when you're just at so much risk to not having the bushels to deliver? But still, we are getting now near, particularly on continuous wheat in the more central part of the state where we don't have fallow involved, we're getting pretty close to break-even levels, if not profitable levels, for some of the better wheat. And if we happen to to have wheat that has good protein, that we can get a premium on top of that, much less the bushels, then we can really make some money. So what we're hoping for is to make a profit through a combination of volume and quality, and we see some prices now for at least decent quality wheat that seem to be in the ballpark of our break-evens. It's going to be a real horse race and challenging decision for farmers to pull the trigger on locking in some of those prices, given the remaining production risks that they have.
And as you mentioned, hot, dry weather will play a role as we move forward.
Well, I think so. And for wheat, again, we're just entering the harvest time frame. For corn, grain sorghum, soybeans, for some of those crops, I think a lot of people probably are getting in the latter part, if not finished up on their planting. So now we're watching crop development and kind of gauging our potential. And a lot of those decisions on whether we price some of this grain will have to do with our crop insurance coverage. You know, what type of APH levels, 65, 70, 75 or more, are we guaranteed at, so that if we do some forward pricing, as prices would tend to jump up higher, do we have coverage to replace bushels if we get a problem later? I think that'll be an issue. And as we sit now, here we're talking about dry conditions going into early June. I think maybe the last thing to really remind people of is that, gosh, when you look at these markets, particularly the feed grain markets, the last several years, it's not uncommon to see crops get established, suddenly finding themselves with good subsoil moisture potential, and then having the futures market start to not worry anymore about that crop, or at least delay worries. If that happens, then we're vulnerable to sliding lower with new crop futures and seeing some of our new crop pricing opportunities go away. So that really is the risk we're at right now. At this point, it looks pretty dry. We can't really say that's going to happen quite yet, but give us 2 or 3 weeks. If rains do come and the crop starts to look good, we're at risk to starting to see some of the current levels of futures prices decline and move lower off into the fall of 2018.
As always, Dan, we thank you for the update, and if anybody wants more information or if they like to just look at graph after graph after graph, they're going to want to visit agmanager.info and look at all of your material.
Well, yes, we have graphs, but we also have some hopefully understandable text that will describe this stuff before they get off into our charts.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, following heavy rains and hail in parts of western Kansas, K-State crop production and cropping system specialist Ignacio Ciampitti has been getting a lot of questions about potential corn damage. Ignacio, you are getting a lot of questions about corn right now, and you're telling me that there are some issues out there.
Yeah, I mean, we have in the last couple of weeks, corn, I mean, in terms of planting time, we are almost done. Most of the corn across the entire state, the western part was the one that was coming usually late. That one is the one that is getting close to finished, so that's good news. Progress on planting is going okay. Now we will start seeing, and that's why I start having a lot of questions. I mean, issues, problems that happened 10 days or 20 days ago, and they will be reflecting today. A few topics on corn that early season issues. We have a specific, article that it will go out just by discussing potential problems in corn early season. But some of the main issues that we are facing right now, and we were facing a couple of weeks ago, is we have in the western part of the state several big thunderstorms going across many of our counties, and then many of the questions that we have received were related to hail damage. And the main question on hail damage is until what point corn might be tolerant and how susceptible the plant is to hail damage. So then for one of the things that I did, and we team up with the Kansas Corn Commission, and we put together a very nice article. This article was published May 21st. And the idea was just to provide a brief overview of potential issues, and if the corn will survive to these potential problems of hail damage or not. First things that we did is that we did that publication in collaboration with Dale Field. He's the research director for Kansas Corn. Many of the topics we discussed was what happened if my corn was just emerged, or if the corn, for example, was barely emerging. Is that corn more tolerant or susceptible to any hail damage? And one of the things that we always tend to say is that if the hail damage occurred before corn is around 5 leaves, okay, and then when you're thinking about 5 leaves, usually you have a size of plant that is sometimes maybe the size of your hand and maybe a little bit taller, but we are counting the leaves that they are exposing the color. And the first leaf on the corn, as everyone will know, first leaf is kind of around the tip, and then after that, all the leaves are exactly the same. So when you are seeing 1 rounded tip leaf and 4 more, that is what we call the 5-leaf stage. Why it's critical to recognize this stage is because the growing point is the point of inside of the stems that is growing and differentiating leaves. So what is the meaning of differentiating leaves? Means that point is the one that will produce, and from that specific point will produce all the leaves from the plant.
So if that gets damaged...
So if that gets damaged, most likely, the plant will have really low chances to survive. And why we need to recognize very well the B5 stage or 5-leaf stage is because until that point, the growing point usually before that time is below the ground. So immediately after that stage, that point basically is still continuously growing, and it's growing inside of the stems or those tiny stems, but it's basically emerging from the below ground position to above ground position. So the main point, is any hail damage affecting plants that they are at B5 or after B5 will have a high likelihood to present severe type of damage. Many times those plants potentially might not be able to recover. And one of the tips that we tend to say many times for farmers when you have any hail damage problem, many times you go back to the field on the day after. And it's really hard to take a decision when you look at that corn. Because unless the corn is entirely destroyed and not anchored, to the soil, I will say many times it's really hard to know exactly if that corn will be able to survive or not. We have seen situations, of really severe problems in the field, and then those plants, a week after, if they keep, moving them forward and putting more leaves, those plants will be able to recover. So the key factor on hail damage is basically to understand that if a week after the damage occurred, those plants are still, growing and developing leaf, then I would say most likely those plants will be able to succeed. Many questions our farmers will be asking many times is, if this type of damage will be impacting yields. Most likely the impacts on yields are very small if the plant can recover. Because imagine that we are only affecting a very tiny plant, and we are delaying that plant in many situations, for just a few days. More thinking about our weather conditions today. Today, weather conditions and heat is basically promoting, a really fast growth. One of the challenges with this fast growth is that many times we are seeing what usually might take 7 days or 10 days to develop a leaf. In many situations, and now we are seeing that each new leaf is coming around 2 to 4 days.
So that may be a benefit in this case.
Yes, potentially. Many times when the plants are really small, it's a benefit having this temperature. The only challenge is that the growth of those leaves, is really fast. So in many situations, we start seeing some kind of yellow leaves. And in many situations, those yellow leaves on the upper part of the plant are coming because the plant is growing too fast. And the green colors on the leaves is coming from a pigment that is called chlorophyll. And many times conditions of, for the leaf to grow, are really fast. That chlorophyll tends not to form as fast. And then those leaves that they are exposed before the chlorophyll is formed. And usually someone might tend to think, I have a problem with nitrogen. And in many situations might be just an asynchrony between rapid leaf growth versus basically a lack of those leaves that they were not really forming that chlorophyll yet. So be careful about looking at those conditions. Another potential problem we are already seeing in some locations is nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies might come in different ways. One might be related to wet conditions. There are few sections of the state, believe it or not, that are getting good rains, in fact, sometimes even excess of moisture. I was impressed by some of the pictures coming, even situations on the east part, when you are seeing central and west that we are so dry in many situations. It's very contrasting. In those cases, you need to think about if you apply most of the nutrients early in the season, those nutrients, if they are not tied up in the soil, they might tend to be lost. In those situations, the plant will show deficiencies. Another issues are that we start seeing right now after planting is sidewall compaction and situations of poor root development. Anytime that basically we are planting into too wet conditions or the plant was not able to develop roots, good size of roots, and we are saying that by B5 we should have a really good size of roots. In those situations, we might start seeing deficiencies, but they might not be related to a lack of a nutrient in the soil, but it's because of a lack of a proper root development. And this year we have interacted with people, and I have seen some situations, in one field in Marion, Kansas, connected to potassium deficiencies. And those potassium deficiencies were specifically connected to sidewall compaction, lack of a proper root development, and then the plant basically is suffering of early season, really early season, because those plants were really small potassium deficiency. So here now it's a reflection, we are seeing reflection of what happened at planting time. If our planting conditions were not good, or if we have any specific problems, we start seeing all those issues coming up. So I would say if you have a chance, go out and start scouting corn, because I think that it will be excellent to make sure that you can look at those fields before it gets too late. Because those deficiencies, at this point, if we cannot help to mitigate deficiencies, like those, they will be probably even worse. It will be worse during the growing season as the plant will need more and more nutrients. There will be many early season issues that they will be appearing in our cornfields now that everything got planted. Hopefully, these high temperatures are helping to speed up all the planting corn and those plants, but we hope that those high temperatures will start to turn into a more kind of a lower. Right now, our corn is not yet suffering. We have small plants, but we need to realize that the demand for the plants, as they are going faster mode, it will be high. And if we are reaching to this specific point in 2 or 3 weeks, as we are reaching to the moment of elongation, then we will start having issues. So hopefully conditions will improve. Hopefully temperature will start at least going down or going to more normals. For May, we already have kind of our mini July type of weather conditions. So far, everything looks good. We still have, few challenges connected to early season, production problems. But good news is that most of the corn across the state is almost planted, almost done.
And stay on top of things.
That's always my advice. We need to get out. We need to look at all our fields. Scouting is one of the main issues and one of the most successful preventive tools to make sure that we can scout, look at the fields, and react.
That's K-State crop production and cropping system specialist Ignacio Ciampitti. You can find the latest agronomy news in the department's e-updates at agronomy.ksu.edu. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Hello, this is Bill Curtis on behalf of the National Weather Service. Being a native Kansan, I know that springtime can bring life-threatening weather in the form of tornadoes. If the National Weather Service issues a tornado warning for your area, take cover in a basement or small interior room. Stay away from windows and exterior walls. And listen to NOAA Weather Radio to stay abreast of the changing weather situation. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
listening to Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. In today's agricultural news, the U.S. Department of Agriculture will begin accepting disaster assistance program applications on Monday, June 4th from agricultural producers who suffered livestock, honeybees, farm-raised fish, and other losses due to natural disasters. USDA's Farm Service Agency is reopening the application period for 2 disaster assistance programs in response to statutory changes made by Congress earlier this year. Beginning June 4th, FSA will accept new applications for losses for calendar year 2017 or 2018 filed under the Livestock Indemnity Program or Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish Program. Producers who already submitted applications and received decisions on their applications for these years do not need to file again, but they can reapply if they have additional losses or their application was disapproved because it was filed late. In February, Congress passed the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which made several changes to these 2 disaster programs. Well, in addition to fielding questions about potential hail damage in western Kansas, Ignacio Ciampitti says the producers are also wanting more information about volunteer corn and whether it needs to be addressed. He says the research shows that corn growers don't want volunteer corn in their fields.
We also have a very nice short article that we developed on discussing very briefly volunteer corn. And this year, believe it or not, we have seen many fields and many farmers asking specifically how to control it. The volunteer corn, that type of corn that you don't want to have in your field. It's not the corn that you planted. And the main concept we need to realize, the volunteer corn is very highly competitive, specifically acting as a weed. So basically, it's competing with corn, and if you have a soybean stand, it will be competing with soybeans. And the key factor, to be honest, is we need to start controlling as quickly as possible. One of the first questions that one of our farmers was asking us, is there any large yield impact? And the ranges are very wide, and I think that depends many times on how many plants you have in the field. But we have a few studies. For example, in one of the studies from Iowa State, they reported that 1 volunteer corn plant per 10 feet of row were reducing yield in 1.3%. So imagine only one volunteer corn plant in 10 feet of row. So I think that one of the things is that we need to realize is the yield impact on corn. It basically is reduced and is competing with corn for the same resources. And the resources are water and nutrients. What we are always saying is if you volunteer, corn populations are really high and conditions are remaining too dry. Sometimes, for example, like trying to do an inter-row cultivation, it could be one of the most effective tools. Unless, there are some other traits. The challenge with, some of the volunteer corn, that if it's corn that has some herbicide traits, is really hard to be controlled. But this inter-row cultivation, it can be one of the ways, basically, to make sure that you can control that.
That's K-State Crop Production and Cropping System Specialist Ignacio Ciampitti. Meanwhile, the National Corn Growers Association is urging the EPA to expeditiously take steps to remove barriers and allow for year-round sales of ethanol blends greater than 10%, such as E15. Consumers across the country are losing access to the option of E15 today because of a barrier limiting the ability of fuel retailers to offer ethanol blends greater than 10% in most of the country from June 1st to September 15th. President Trump has reaffirmed his commitment to providing RVP parity for E15. However, the EPA has yet to announce the necessary regulatory steps to make that happen. And in this week's Wheat Scoop, Marcia Boswell has a closer look at U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue's visit to Kansas, which included stops in and around Manhattan.
U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue made Kansas a stop on his Back to Our Roots tour on May 30th to meet with farmers. Along with Senators Pat Roberts and Jerry Moran, he participated in a discussion panel at the Agriculture Roundup at River Creek Farms near Manhattan. Kansas Association of Wheat Growers President Ken Wood had the opportunity to ask Secretary Perdue a question on the topic of agriculture research.
Manhattan has become quite a hub for agriculture research, as you probably know. We've got NBAF coming there. We've got the USDA facility there, Kansas State University, and the facility that's near and dear to my heart is the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center. That was started by farmers, funded by farmers, and the research is funded by farmers through the checkoff now. My question is, where do you envision ag research going from here, and how do you think farmers will be involved in that process?
Secretary Perdue responded that continued investment in ag research is vital.
Well, I think, again, research is critical. We had to fight for the research funding in the President's budget this last time, but it's absolutely vital. You've seen the productivity increases. Wheat is somewhat of a plateau right now, but I think the interesting things that we have in wheat research will be amazing in the future, and it's research is critical. USDA, through the Agricultural Research Service, in conjunction with our land grants like Kansas State and others, as well as the private entities that you mentioned, and the collaboration is there. It'll need to continue to be there. There's no one has a monopoly on intellectual pursuits when it comes to research. We're seeing some pretty interesting things now with the gene technology editing and CRISPR-9 that's going to bring some really gee whiz kind of things out there that farmers may be growing a lot of other things other than just food in the future there. But we've got some real potential, but we cannot slow down. We've seen even the EU and China surpassing us on agricultural research expenditures. We never want to be behind any foreign country when it comes to food production.
Secretary Perdue also emphasized the need for getting a farm bill passed by Congress before September. Senator Roberts agreed that a farm bill will be passed this year.
Number one issue everywhere we go is crop insurance, especially now during the times that we've had here in Kansas. We have to have crop insurance. There are amendments that are counterproductive to that. We will defeat those amendments, and crop insurance will be just fine.
For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Remember to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today. You can visit agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. Then by tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Protecting and preserving the nation's water supply is critical to our economic future and human health. Current irrigation trends could deplete 69% of the groundwater in the Ogallala Aquifer within 50 years. The top 8 Kansas counties for agricultural production are located in western Kansas, which overlies the aquifer. Those counties contribute about 1/3 of the total agricultural revenue for Kansas. Water is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing by contributing to the 50-year water policy process and advancing efficient irrigation and water monitoring systems for farm and home use. For more information, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. We end the week with an update on Kansas agricultural weather with K-State climatologist Mary Knapp. Mary, this is one of those weeks you're glad to talk about the weather because there's actually some rain to talk about, and in portions of Kansas this last week, we saw some almost torrential to widespread heavy rain.
And it definitely was on the torrential category. In Graham County in particular, there were quite a few reports of rainfall totals over 5 inches, and one spot saw over 9 inches. That had its problems because it was not a week-long event. It was a 24-hour event, so there was flooding, again, particularly in the Hill City area, and a lot of that west central part of the state, Hill City, Graham, and Gove counties in particular, with that flooding event. The western divisions all saw above normal rainfall for the week. When we look at the divisional averages, the Northwest averaged 1.14 inches, which is over 200% of normal for the week, actually 234%. The West Central averaged 2.03 inches, which is 2.5 times their normal weekly precip. And the Southwest, they kind of got the short end of the stick. They only averaged 1.35 inches, but that's still almost 200% of normal, 192% to be exact. In fact, all of the divisions in the state were above normal for the week, except the Northeast and the East Central. The East Central wasn't impacted as badly because they have had several wet weeks already, but in that northeastern area of the state, we really are beginning to dig a pretty good deficit. And again, here in Manhattan, we average about 1/1800ths of an inch a day, so every day without rain makes a big difference. We did get some rain after that weekly total was calculated, and that ends on the 29th of May. But again, it was widely spread. In the Manhattan area, Wednesday's rains ranged from 1.5 inches on the northwest side of town to 0.3 of an inch on the southeast. And Manhattan isn't that large, so it's not far distance between those two extremes.
In regard to the rains in the western divisions, what does that mean for field work? I'm assuming that some of those torrential areas are going to take a while to dry out, while others may not have to put off a lot of work.
Right. It will probably delay at least some field work for a while, but we are looking for a dry week in the week coming up, so that will, with the winds and the temperatures, it won't take as long as you might think for that top level to dry out. The other question will be how much of that rain actually penetrated and how much of it just simply ran off. The runoff isn't entirely negative because that can help fill some stock ponds and some stream flows, but it's not going to address a long-term deficit in those deeper subsoil areas.
You mentioned temperatures, and a lot of people that I ran into over the Memorial Day weekend were commenting about how it felt more like the 4th of July than Memorial Day.
Right. It was a very warm week. We saw an average of 76.6 degrees statewide, which is 9.9 degrees warmer than normal. The warmest part of the state was actually the Central Division. Abilene topped out on 103 degrees on the 26th. The Western divisions mostly saw the upper 90s to 100 degrees. And again, looking at a departure of 9 to almost 11 degrees. The Central Division, that average was 78.1 degrees, which was almost 12 degrees warmer than normal. We'll work on getting all of our numbers in. Today's actually the 1st of June, but it takes a couple of days for all those numbers to get in. So next week we'll have a recap of what May actually averaged out to be and how that ranks. There's some thought that it may, in contrast to April being the coolest of our Aprils on record, may come up as one of our warmest on records, and we'll see how that plays.
It's certainly been an unusual spring, that's for sure. We go from the cold to the extremely hot.
Right, and we did have a little bit of cooler weather as we started the month, but it has been a very warm month. Looking at Manhattan's numbers, even with our very warm May, we're still running about 3 degrees cooler than normal for the year to date. So shows how cool our spring actually was.
We will hit the start of summer this month in June, later on this month. What can we expect, I guess, across the June, July, August time frame?
Well, as far as the temperatures go, this warmer than normal trend is expected to continue through June, and the outlook for the 3-month period, June, July, and August, also continues that trend for warmer than normal temperatures. Again, not necessarily 9 degrees warmer than normal, but a generally warmer than average pattern for the summer. As far as precipitation goes, they're neutral on that. It's equally likely to be wetter or drier than normal. Again, in our summer season, a lot of this is convective storms where a 9-inch rain can make a really big difference in that could skew you towards wetter than normal, even if the distribution isn't the most favorable for our crop development.
What we'd really like to see is some of those nice, slow drenching rains.
Right. A 2 or 3 day rain event, could do it Sunday into Monday, give people enough of a weekend so they can enjoy the outdoor activities, but a break so that they can rest from the field work and then get back on it as we go into the work week. Again, we're getting ready for the first cutting of alfalfa and for the hay season. Need to have a couple of dry days so that can be put up in good shape. There's a lot of demand for feed because a lot of that was exhausted with the very dry winter and the very slow start to the spring season. That has meant that pastures didn't green up as fast, so they were feeding later and exhausting some of the feed supplies. So that's going to be an issue, again, depending upon how productive the summer can be.
Some cool overnights would be welcome as well.
Right. We've already addressed the fact that these warm temperatures have had a detrimental effect on the grain fill for wheat. You can see that on the e-update on agronomy.ksu.edu. But also of concern is we're going to be moving into the time where the corn will be beginning to move into the silking and tasseling area, and high temperatures at that point can have a very negative impact on the overall yield.
That's K-State climatologist Mary Knapp with a look at Kansas agricultural weather. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wichman. This is the K-State Radio Network.